Hello, welcome back. I hope that you're having a good time, and looks like some relaxations are on the cards in different states. And what's my topic today? I have chosen something that is very close to my heart: art. Many of us like to see art, to go to museums. We buy paintings, we hang them. But have you ever wondered what actually art does to your brain or your mind or your cognition? So I will talk a bit of evolution of art in the species, because we are the only one that make art. And secondly, a little bit of the real commercial development of art in 17th and 18th century in Europe. And then how digitized art now museums are supplying, and the use of VR and virtual tours of them can be very handy in times of no mobility and social distancing and no international travel. And finally, some tips that can be useful, how art can really come to help us, among other things, when it comes to maintaining our well-being, because art always has served that purpose. Apart from artists creating it, there have been, without the audience, the consumers, art would be nowhere. So let's get going. Why art evolved? Of course, art evolved because humans wanted to express their inner thoughts. The Neanderthals particularly have not been praised for their art-making skills, but recent findings in Spain suggest that they too had some kind of creativity.
Ever since the discovery of Neanderthal fossils in the 19th century, Neanderthals have had rather bad press. In fact, the original name for Neanderthals was proposed as Homo stupidus, the stupid human, and people have variously portrayed them rather gorilla-like and incapable of belief systems and symbolic thought. What we find here is evidence of Neanderthal painting, not only just smearing pigments on the wall, but actually painting something that is symbolic, that represents something.
This panel comprises of various components, so you can see red lines that form squares. Inside these rectangles that formed by these lines, you can actually see animal paintings. So here's the back half of an animal. We don't know what type of animal it is. And here, very fading, is a front part. Here's a head of an animal, the legs, ears. On top of the squares, you see lots of red dots. Nobody really knows what this means, but it's certainly done by humans who came into these caves and painted the walls. And the very question is, how old and when did this happen?
Although it's controversial, because Homo sapiens have been kind of been credited for creating symbolic art, and not the Neanderthals. As far as Homo sapiens are concerned, the understanding is that symbolic art emerged about 50,000 years ago, and you have all the examples of cave paintings from Spain to France to India to everywhere. So you find basically a gradual increase in the symbolic abstractness of art. So it's as if there were recognized artists who had taken it up as their profession. So you had artists and you had their audience. That has remained so. And it has been linked to so-called cognitive revolution. Many people have argued that the true cognitive revolution happened 50,000 years ago, and the artifacts of art can give us clue. Due to symbolic species, art has a very, very long history, and when human beings could satisfy basic needs, then they probably went into their caves, and some of them, not all, wanted to express what they saw, what they felt, and what was not even present, because art always does that, and somewhere audience. So if there were no audience, like some ancient caveman is coming into the cave and trying to paint something and nobody is bothering to see, art wouldn't have evolved. So art had its artists and art had its audience. That art is such an evolutionary force and still continues that it can even protect us in things or situations like this. We can turn to art. We can get some consolation that art can be of some help when we have mental maladies or social maladies of this type. Of course, there is a lot of debate. What can be considered the first art? And a lot of archaeologists who have discovered stuff, they really don't know which one to consider art, because a lot of people think that anything just can't be art. But I mean, it doesn't matter what we consider art, because we see that the emergence of art from impressionism to from classicism to impressionism to abstract art, now to digital art. So we have to understand that it's an evolutionary thing. I mean, the first person must have just taken a stone and would have looked at it in a different way. That different way is linked to a change in consciousness, and that is important for cognitive scientists or neuroscientists, because they don't look at art as some object that somebody has created, but the mind behind it. So another important point in this connection is to look at the brain, because the evolution of the brain has been linked to more complex art. So the estimation is that 40,000-50,000 years ago, when the symbolic capacity emerged, more abstract art also emerged. So there is a connection between evolutionary changes in the brain and complex art or artifacts and social cognition. So many things emerge probably together. Of course, the history of art is a very long thing to cover. I mean, humans have been creating art ever since, and with the evolution of religion and religious art particularly, things have progressed, and you have a long history of art within the evolution of Christianity and later Islamic art, and I can't get into that. But let's focus on some other things that happened in the 15th, 16th century, the time of Renaissance. So the true commercialization of art and artists being paid for their work and art spreading out everywhere happened around that time. And the locations, of course, were Florence and in Venice in Italy, and of course in Netherlands and in many other places. So that was the golden period of art, and I recommend a particular book if you are interested in that period. Simon Scamas, who also produced a very nice series on art for BBC. I'm giving the link. I enjoyed watching that a lot. So what happened at that time? It's linked to this question. Was art important? Because we had philosophical revolution, we had people like Descartes, you had people like Spinoza, you had other people, and it was a period of great religious turmoil. And you also had artists like Leonardo and other people who were, creating new forms of art and changing the field. So many authors have speculated that these so-called philosophers were more scientifically inclined and rationalist, like Descartes or Spinoza, really didn't bother about art, although they could have been coming in close contacts, like Spinoza. I'm not remember the exact timeline, like Sir Rembrandt, Spinoza. He was in Amsterdam and or in Leiden, and later moved to Hague. And Rembrandt and other Dutch artists of the time, they would create art at the same time. So, but some authors have kind of speculated that Spinoza had no inclination towards art. So you had scientific revolution, the rise of rationality, and you had art emerging as well. But what was the contact? Even today, we find this very popular notion that not everybody is artistic. I mean, you go to a new city and you don't go to the art museum, but some other people go to cities just to go to the art museums, and they enjoy a lot. So we have varieties of people. So what I'm trying to say is that appreciating art is not a general thing. From 17th century onwards, the commercialization of art and artists and opening up of museums, you have revolutions and like Louvre and the British Museum and all this, they opened, and in Germany, in Berlin particularly. Of course, later on you had the colonial period where there are many accusations that these people, they stole arts of the natives, and they took and they kind of hoarded these museums. Even now there are claims that this belongs to India, this belongs to that, but that's not the point. So what I'm trying to say is that artistic can you enjoy art in a theory independent way, or are we programmed in a certain way that some people can enjoy and some other people they just don't bother, because it really matters for a lot of other regions. So that's very important for even what I'm going to say next, like the watching of art through VR or taking a virtual tour or digitizing. Because if you are not inclined, then obviously they don't matter to you. You can have the same fun reading some other book, or why bother about art? The other very important point is about the understanding of art from modern scientific studies. A field called neuroaesthetics has been developing, and particularly somebody like Samir Jackie, who wrote a book and has done research showing that when you see art, there are distinct brain activities in people who enjoy art more as opposed to people who don't like art. So basically, it is the same thing. But Jackie's work, and there is a book that I give the link below, also takes a very comprehensive cognitive view or neurocognitive view of art in the brain. And we also have people like Eric Kandel. Many of you who know neuroscience, you know him for his work on memory, but Eric Kandel wrote a fabulous book on reductionism is in art, and it's a very interesting book because you see a man who is a biologist taking deep interest and finding connections between art and science, and particularly at the level of methodologies. So neuroaesthetics is the field that tries to understand how the brain appreciates art and whether appreciating art can have other effects on the brain itself. And many studies otherwise have been happening. For example, if you go to a museum, like a Norwegian study that I cite, where people like old elderly people were taken and, for a museum tour and the long study, it was found that it kind of has a very calming positive effect. So that's a very nice thing, because if people cannot go out and you take them to art museums, so art therapy is the most popular word, but I'm talking about scientific studies. So even in other studies, it has been found that art can influence certain specific cognitive systems of the brain. Art looked from a cognitive scientist or a neurocognitive scientist point of view is another thing, because we are more interested in finding out whatever human beings do and they like, whether the brain prepares itself. That studies have shown when you view art through VR or even on taking a tour on a computer monitor of a museum, because most museums are now kind of there, it has a certain effect on cognitive systems. So the point I'm trying to make is that art, just like music and sports and reading, writing, and many other things, art has a serious cognitive consequence on your brain, and you can use art to enhance your overall cognitive well-beingness. COVID has changed the whole structure of the world, from economics to transport to education and so on and so forth. And museums particularly, that used to attract a lot of people, they are in a position not to attract anyone. So what happens to museums? So, I mean, before COVID, what some of the great museums were doing, they were digitizing and they were opening it for people. So people can see the art in museums like the Metropolitan Museum or Louvre or the British Museum or some other museum. I mean, if you scroll internet, you will find that most of these museums, they have digitized archives where you can go to particular, even rooms and look at your favorite paintings. So you can take advantage of that, and I think it's a great way to spend time, and they give you all the details of the art, the objects, and that is now 3D, VR. You just have to search and log in, and you are free to view. I mean, you don't have to pay anything. Otherwise, I remember when I used to visit museums in Europe or elsewhere, you either have very long queues and You have to buy an audio, information stuff by paying money, but it's all free now. You just sit in front of your computer and put your headphones, and you are in that particular museum. So I appreciate the digitizing activities of many museums that will come handy in a situation like this. But is it same? This is a very important question. I mean, I go and stand in front of a Van Gogh and a Rembrandt, and I see it virtually. Well, the same thing would come, the issue of embodiedness. But we can't have the question of embodiedness now because we have social restriction. So we have to create some kind of, maybe the brain would adapt a virtual embodiedness, but in this virtual sense. So embodiedness will emerge if everybody engages in enjoying art digitally. The work in neuroaesthetics, the work of Samir Jeki and there are some other people, they actually indicate that if you engage with art, it has a particular value for your brain. So art is just not, the commercialization of art is a different thing. The sales in, auction houses and the big newses that you sometimes see that X is sold in millions and billions. That is one thing. But I'm talking about just being in the presence of art and what it does to you. If it does something to you, and I'm interested as a cognitive scientist in that question, then certain brain areas are active, and how are other things influenced if I spend time with art. So digitization of art, the use of VR at your own pace, in your own home, is going probably to be the norm, and we just have to pick up these habits, and we just can get with it. And probably as social distancing is on, the museums themselves and technologies and many things would come together in order to give us more access, so that we feel more comfortable in accessing art in this digitized format. But let me tell you a trivia. I remember that I was in Musée d'Orsay in Paris, which has a very wide collection of Van Gogh and many other last December. And people used to stand in front of the artworks and they would just put, picture. But this behavior has already been there. I mean, people used to go to museums and take pictures rather than enjoying art. Right there in front of it, there is a Van Gogh, but people would be just snapping. So we already have that behavior. So that was good or bad, I don't want to comment, but let's bring back and use it when we need it now. So we were already in the digitized format. The art's effects on the mind is also to be connected with neuropsychology. So Freud particularly was very keen on art. And Freud was a student obviously in Paris, in the La Salpêtre hospital at the time. And Freud must have come in contact with a lot of French art. And so Freud, there are many comments that Freud or Freudian principles either artists used, or Freud himself was a great fan. And Lucian Freud is, his grandson, I believe. He's a well-known artist, as you may know, and who recently died, I think. So psychoanalysis and art, they have a long history of give and take. So if they have a history, then obviously cognitive scientists cannot shy away from those kinds of things. And we have to understand that the human mind is representing itself in art. So if I'm trying to understand the human mind, then I have to take art seriously. So even in this century, when psychology developed and neurology developed and other fields developed and the cognitive revolution happened, art was evolving parallelly. And neuroaesthetics stands on all these kinds of history. It's not a separate field. It's not trying out your fancy fMRI on some people who are viewing art. I mean, I strongly recommend reading Samir Jeki's book. You'll find out that it's more evolutionary, philosophical side to art that we try to understand through the use of modern method. So I hope that you enjoy a bit of more opening up of this stuff in your cities wherever I am. And I just had a round, and everything is kind of open, but social distancing is on, and that's another thing. We see how we cope. And you have a great time viewing art or seeing documentaries or reading a book. And if you would like to put a comment, then please do so, and any other suggestions. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you have a great time, and see you next time. And please do like, subscribe, or give a comment. I'm just trying out a pair of new wireless microphone that I purchased. I mean, thankfully, Raukala is open now, and I'm very happy to see all this. But then I had to follow social distancing, and that's going to be the norm. And I can imagine that's going to change a lot of stuff. It's not easy. Well, I would reflect on that sometimes later. But I'm happy that I could purchase a pair of wireless microphones that will help me to give you better sound.